Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Karim Lakhani. From refugee to renowned hospitality executive, Karim's journey began when his family came to Canada from Uganda, losing everything overnight. At just 12 years old, he was thrust into a new world. He began first as a dishwasher, later worked alongside world-famous chefs, and became an award-winning chef himself before moving into senior leadership roles. He has guided major food and beverage programs for well-known hotel groups such as HEI and Interstate. He has also served on food and beverage advisory boards for brands like Marriott and Intercontinental. Today, he is the Executive Vice President of Food and Beverage and Procurement at Northwood Hospitality, a boutique hotel management company focused on elevating guest experiences through a people-first culture. They provide full-service operations in areas like sales and marketing, design, accounting, revenue management, and more. And we're going to hear about his work surrounding AI and predictive purchasing. But before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. Imagine being able to give your restaurant employees free access to doctors, therapists, and prescription medications. And here's the fun part. The program actually puts more money into your employees' pockets. And the companies too. One recent client was able to increase net profits by $900 per employee per year. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, the Executive Vice President of Food and Beverage and Procurement of Northwood Hospitality, Karim. Thanks for making the time to share your story today.
Anthony, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on with you today.
All right. So, Karim, first I would like to hear about your family's experience coming to Canada as refugees from Uganda. What do you remember? What was it like to suddenly lose everything that you had known?
Well, it started in 1972 in Uganda. The dictator Idi Amin ordered nearly all Ugandan Asians to leave the country within 90 days. Primarily what began in terror and loss for our families. Our citizenship was stripped, livelihoods, and the familiarity of home. We moved from chaos, disoriented, to transit camps and long, exhausting flights to Canada. And other families were, thrown in other countries. My extended family of my mom, my uncles, they were in Geneva, in Switzerland, or in France. We ended up in Canada. And back home in Uganda, we were a close-knit family. We all lived close in one small town. So it was very difficult at the age of 12 to be thrown apart like that. And then, just losing your friends overnight. The difficult transitions eventually led to safety and a slow process of rebuilding our lives in Canada. We ended up in Regina, Saskatchewan, with a great community support locally, enabling us to start with new beginnings from almost nothing. We temporarily stayed in a hotel while searching for affordable housing. So, learning, I did speak English, but understanding the Canadian culture and their ways was a challenge. But you persevere when you're young.
So your parents coming here, how did they find work for the first time?
So my mother, her background, she was very well educated, involved in the family business, bakeries, restaurants, dairy operations. She was in fashion in Uganda. She also studied in England. And overnight, she had to find a way to support the family. So with that said, with everything left behind, she started as a dishwasher at the hotel that we were put up as in Regina as refugees. So that's how she got her first start in, because the big thing was, the terminology that was always used is you don't have Canadian experience. So it was always difficult, no matter how well educated you were, to get a professional job.
Was there some legitimacy to that comment, or was that a veiled way of saying you're not one of us?
I think initially, yes, you're not one of us. There was discrimination by all means. And, not to belabor the point, but, color of skin, we spoke English very well. We were raised, under the British colony. So English was our language in school and at home. Professionally trained and ran businesses.
Mm. What was the biggest thing to get used to in terms of that Canadian culture? You say you spoke English, but getting used to the culture there was something else.
Yes. So, in Uganda, we didn't have snow. We didn't play hockey. We didn't skate. We landed in Regina, Saskatchewan in November of 1972. And, the biggest challenge was connecting with your, classmates or the neighbors or your working, where my mom used to work. So it was the biggest challenge was, and I'll give you a quick example of if we were, at the restaurant in the hotel, they would offer us cereal and then they would ask us, well, did you have cornflakes in Africa? And, those little things that we have to get used to that, yes, we were eating cornflakes. We had that availability. So it was just different, I think, in 1972, even for the Canadians. But they were very generous. I mean, there were about 80,000 people that were, thrown out of Uganda, and the Canadians took on 7,000 of us. So it was a big change in those days for them.
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes as a 12-year-old. That's how old you were, right, at the time?
Yes.
Yeah. And was there any sort of warning that, hey, this transition was going to happen, or did it take place very suddenly?
Well, for us, it was very sudden. We only had 90 days to basically leave everything behind. And, we had to find a sponsor in Canada. So my mom's family worked diligently through a church to get a sponsor. And then we found a sponsor in Regina, Saskatchewan. And then we had to go to the Canadian Embassy, get medical, get checked out, get our paperwork. And then we were told that, we would have a flight on a certain date. And, people that were exiting Uganda, it was very difficult to leave. They didn't make it easy. You went through where there was a lot of looting going on during the time that those 90 days. Going to school, you'd see dead bodies floating in the river, blood on the streets. It was a difficult time. But, we persevered. And even when we were headed to the airport, we were escorted by the Canadian government in a bus, but we were still stopped by checkpoints because they wanted to take whatever we had. If we had jewelry or any cash or whatever it was basically taken away. And, women were strip searched and some were raped. So it was a difficult time for a 12-year-old to see that. It was difficult.
Can you put into words how that shaped you going forward in your life?
It you grew up fast. You became an adult overnight. Unfortunately, my father passed away in Uganda. I was 7 years old, but we had a great family infrastructure. But when we were thrown apart, and my sister at the time was studying in England, so she fortunately was out of the country. So it was just my mom and I, and it was more, you know, becoming so-called man of the house. Even though my mom, she was a very strong woman, well-educated, well entrenched in the community, supporting people that needed help. Education was a big part of our background. And so she raised us as a single mom. So, but you had to grow up pretty fast. And, you know, that childhood of going and playing after school and all that, that was difficult to do.
Mm. So how did your earliest experiences in the hospitality industry there in Canada begin?
So it was ironic. The job that my mom took on, basically I took on at the age of 13, a few months later, because my mom was required to go for surgery in a hospital. And then, she had to come home. And before going to the hospital, she asked the chef that she was working with if it would be okay that her son would come and help as the dishwasher to take over while she was going through her surgery and healing process. So the chef was very kind and allowed me to join his team at the age of 13. At that point, I had no idea what the legal age of working was in Canada, but he was very kind. So that's how I started while going to grade school, working part-time.
And did you just continue as you were going through grade school and high school, working in the same field?
Yes. So, it's in the hospitality industry, especially in the restaurant business, extra pair of hands come in handy all the time and are needed. So I started off as a dishwasher, and the chef would need somebody on the salad station. So he would train me on the salad station. And so I kind of worked all the way through. And then after a year, we moved to a small little town on the eastern part of Canada, just about 5 hours west of Toronto, a small little town called Tillsonburg, big tobacco country. And I started continuing my grade school and then moved on to high school. So I took on jobs in like different places: Kentucky Fried Chicken, A&W restaurant, motel restaurant, just helping the family financially, whatever I could do.
And then at some point, you entered a special Canadian apprenticeship program that really helped to shape your culinary career. Can you tell us about that, how it came about, what you did?
Yeah. So I was working for a catering company while I was going to high school with a very good chef who was a mentor. And primarily while, I was finishing high school, I was, always had aspirations to either become a pilot or a photographer. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford, college education or, equipment for photography. But my mom was very adamant that I should be going to college, and I didn't want to put financial constraints on her. So the chef recommended, why don't I go for an apprenticeship in Toronto at George Brown College? So I had no idea what that was. And so
you had no idea what an apprenticeship was.
I had no idea what apprenticeship was. But he felt that I had the skills in culinary to be able to take on, this as a career. So the way it works in Canada is you have to first apply for a job under a master chef. Once you're accepted, and then you have to register with the Ontario government for the apprenticeship branch for colleges training. And then get accepted in George Brown College. It was the Culinary Art School in Toronto, with an employment agreement. So once you got the employment agreement, you got accepted. And so then your apprenticeship was a 3-year program in an accredited college. You got your BA and you began working. So you had to work out of the three years every year, 8 months under a master chef practically. And then theory was 4 months. So while you worked, you got paid. And while you went to school, you were paid unemployment. And so I was fortunate enough to get my apprenticeship completed in 2 years rather than 3 years because of my past background.
Because you had already had some of this work experience that they required.
Correct. Yeah.
And how was it that you got to work under a master chef? How did that connection happen?
That's a good question. A friend of the family was working at the Windsor Arms Hotel as an accountant, and he was also a Ugandan refugee. And so my mom reached out to him and said, my son is coming to Toronto. He's looking to work in a hotel. Is there a possibility that you could connect him, or if you have any connections with the chef, that he could come and interview? So that's how connections and making sure that, you understand what is required. And he opened the door. And to this day, very grateful for that.
That made a big difference in the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so while you were taking classes, you're collecting unemployment, you're not getting paid, but are you having to pay for the college education itself, or that's something that the government picks up the tab on?
The government picked up the tab on that.
Okay.
So I didn't have a $50,000, $60,000 yearly tuition, unlike today if you're going to CIA in North America.
Mm. And so what happens after graduation? What's your next stop?
So after graduation, you're an apprentice, and then they offer you a position at the hotel that you're at as a chef de partie, which is the next level. The culinary arts is very much like a military brigade. So there are all these hierarchies that you get offered that you have to work through. So you become a chef de partie, sous chef, and then a executive sous, and then a chef. So the first step was you're offered a chef de partie position. I left that hotel and joined the King Edward Hotel in Toronto, which had just newly opened with a $40 million renovation. And so that's where I, again, started working as a chef de partie. And the chef that I left at the Windsor Arms trying to discourage me not to leave, that this is a new hotel, it's not going to be a good venture. But I stuck to my guns, and I think I made the right decision.
Why? Why do you think that?
It opened a lot of doors for me. The King Edward in Toronto at the time was owned by Trust House Forte, which had over 400 hotels worldwide. And so it opened the doors to the next step of me trying to get European experience. So, while I was at the King Edward, we had a chef come in and do an orientation, and then cooking experiences and tastings for guests. So I approached him. He was from the Hotel de Bergue in Geneva. And I asked him, if it would be possible for me to come and do some training in Geneva, Switzerland. He didn't speak English. I spoke limited French because it was more a Canadian French rather than the French. So long story short, about 12 months later, I got a letter that said that they had accepted me to come and do a stage in Geneva, Switzerland for 18 months.
Stage, what is that?
That's the next stage. Stage means stage, so the next level. from a chef de partie. So
Why was it? Sorry, go
you
ahead.
get to do different stages in the kitchen.
So why was it important for you specifically to get European experience?
That's a very valid question. So Canada had a lot of European chefs. So the first, we had a lot of French chefs that would find it easy to come to Canada to work in Montreal, and then from Montreal because they spoke French, and then they would be able to come to Toronto or other parts of the country once they learned English. And working under those European chefs, I really admired them and talked to them all the time about trying to get, what would be the next step in my career. So it would be just ideal for me to get the European experience. And at that point, European experience was very, very valuable because that opened up a lot of doors from just your background and understanding of the true essence and what true essence of cuisine and the basics are all about.
So you've had the opportunity, Karim, to work with a lot of culinary legends along the way. Aside from that master chef that we just talked about, who really kind of opened the door to that apprenticeship program for you, who's the most memorable one that you were able to work with? And what was the most significant lesson that you learned in that?
So, I was fortunate when I became the chef of the Watergate Hotel. I had the opportunity to work with Jean-Louis Paladin. Jean-Louis Paladin was a one-star Michelin chef. He had his own restaurant in the basement of the hotel and was doing very well. What I learned from him was, he was how to keep an open mind and being creative. The one challenge that I had in Canada was that, the Canadian chefs were very conservative thinking. I found that having that influence with the U.S. openness, it gave you a lot of latitude of, incorporating different cuisines together and being a little bit more creative rather than being more standard, the basic fundamentals. So Jean-Louis Paladin, he set the standard of technique and creativity. He was a champion in resources, rigorous sourcing of local products, really looking at how we could use American products, but working with farmers, things like that. And then the last thing that he was very good at was bringing chefs together, a brotherhood of chefs. And, in the old days, it was everybody kept their recipes to themselves, all that. But in Washington, D.C., we had a great brotherhood of chefs. And he even helped me when I opened my first restaurant at the Watergate, and I had gone to train in Italy. I had the opportunity to train in northern Italy in Bergamo, to really fine tune my skills on Italian cooking. Spent a month just learning how to do risotto in Bergamo. And that was all because of the general manager of the Watergate. But at the same time, Jean-Louis was also very much about, let me bring, some of the key chefs from the city to critique what you feel is the right thing for this new opening. So that was the toughest challenge for me, to have other much more well-versed European chefs, Italian chefs, French chefs coming to taste my food prior to opening the restaurant. And, it opened my eyes. Yes, I was absolutely nervous, but it made me grow substantially of, number one, developing a relationship, but also keeping an open mind, taking feedback and not becoming, defensive on that side. So that was key. And then Michel Richard was another chef that I worked with who also was instrumental. He was very good as far as not only technique, but his background was a pastry chef. So everything with him was an exact science. So, he was using French techniques with American flavors and making food and dining more fun rather than, just uptight, fine dining sort of thing. So he made it really open up. And then the last one was Alan Ducasse. I had the opportunity to work with Alan Ducasse, who, at the time, was the only chef in the world with 3 Michelin stars simultaneously at 3 restaurants in the globe. But, he was rigorous about standards, quality, French techniques, looking at mindful cooking practices. So emphasizing on sustainability in those days, and using natural flavors and ingredients to enhance. So if we were cooking vegetables, we wouldn't be cooking them in just water. We would have vegetable broth to enhance the flavors. And that really stood out on a dish. But it was a very disciplined way and a culture that we didn't have in Canada.
What do you mean by mindful cooking practices?
Well, so it's more about making sure that you respect the ingredients, okay? You don't overpower them with butter, with sauces, bring the natural elements and flavors out of those with enhanced vegetable stock or proper cooking methods, things like that, balances of, modern with environmental responsibility.
And you talked about, sort of a farm to table purchasing locally at, the Watergate there. And this was back in the early 90s. And
Correct.
You talked about sustainable practices with the third chef that you worked with. And again, I'm going to guess this timing is probably, early, late 90s. So kind of before a lot of this stuff was really in vogue.
Absolutely. Yes. We worked, and this was just because of the chefs. They were the ones that started all that. So we would look at sustainable fishing, sustainable vegetables, looking at how ingredients were grown, and we would go to the farms. We would, go to the butcher shops and look at how animals were treated, all those sorts of things. So I guess you could say we were ahead of our times, so to speak. But, we would be on Capitol Hill talking about sustainable fishing, things like that, as a chef's community.
Interesting. What was the reception to that on Capitol Hill at the time?
Very positive. We were close to the waters, of the Chesapeake. So it was a good influence locally to talk about, not overfishing and, having less farming, but all natural. And it was very positive to help the environment, but also help the fishermen for the longevity of their careers.
Something else you talked about regarding your time there at the Watergate, and this is the Watergate, right? The one that everybody knows in DC, yes. The of Nixon fame. Yeah. So One of the things you talked about is, having sort of these renowned international chefs come in and taste your food. It's a little nerve-wracking, but you learn to be very receptive and not defensive to their feedback, which I have to imagine allowed you to grow in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. So my question for you, Karim, is, was that something that came naturally to you, or was that a skill that you really needed to be coached on or learn to acquire, that ability to take that constructive feedback?
It was a combination. So when you are going through your training in school as a chef, it's very much like a military. You respect your elders. Even in our family, we were raised with respecting your elders. And in school, you respected the chefs. You respected, what you were learning. But then in practical, even the chefs that you worked with, you learned from them. So that was already bred into you when you were going through your training phase and working with all these chefs. There was, even though it was a tough environment, there was, and I don't know if you've read Kitchen Confidentials, but it was not an easy, with Anthony Bourdain. The kitchen is not an easy place to work. There's a lot of yelling, screaming, fire, knives. But, it was just like being in the army. That's how you came in line. But so I learned that it was important to learn from the people that wanted to impart their knowledge and embrace it. And, knowledge is power. And I felt that I had to do that. Now, I was an executive chef. They were all executive chefs. They were on a higher level than I was, but I was ready to listen and, make it better for myself and my team.
So what eventually prompted you to begin the transition from being a chef to moving into the corporate side of hospitality?
So while I was, with Capstar Hotels and Resorts and working with Michel Richard, I had, I was working for Michel in Baltimore at Citronelle in Baltimore. And the mother company was Capstar Hotels and Resorts. And Michel at that time had 5 restaurants in Capstar Hotels. The biggest challenge with Michel was he was very creative, very good as far as the food that he was putting out. It was the business side that he lacked. So, and I had that. So I had the creativity, but at the same time, I could manage one of his restaurants and show a profitable operation. So the president of the company came to me and said, look, we need you to be more involved in Michel's operations. So we need you to look at his operations by going to San Francisco, going to LA, going to Santa Barbara, Philadelphia. And at the same time, we want you to be back on Friday, Saturday to be in the restaurant because the customer, I was very engaged with the customer. So I started to learn how to be involved in the operations of Michel's other, not only on the culinary side, but the front of the house. So eventually we sold one of the hotels and the president of the company came to me and said, look, I need you to go to San Francisco to take on Michel's restaurant in San Francisco. I said, well, we already have a chef there. He says, no. I want you to step out of your whites and put on a suit and tie and run the front of the house. And I said, but I don't know. I've never done that before. He said, you're fine. I've seen you in action. You engage very well with guests and you need to make sure that the operation is running well. You will have a maitre d' underneath you, but you need to collaborate between the front and the back of the house. So that was my first step from going from the back of the house to the front of the house. And it was just basically being pushed out.
But even before that, they were having you go to these locations and kind of rein things in from a business perspective. Where did you first get that business side experience of the restaurant industry?
So when you go to school, you get the basic fundamentals of food cost, labor cost, beverage cost, all those sorts of things. And then when I worked, prior to the Watergate, I was also the chef. That was my first gig in Philadelphia at the age of 28 to become the executive chef of the Palace Hotel, which was another Trust House Forte hotel as well. And so that's where I really honed my skills because now this was my business. I was running it as my business, even though it was a hotel. I was incentivized with the profitability, looking at the bottom line, the top line, all those sorts of things. So I had a very good general manager who taught me the skills of looking at food and beverage profitability at the same time, not giving up on quality or whatever that is. And then I even honed my skills more at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. So that's where I got it before I went on to Capstar Hotels and Michel Richard.
And so as you began that transition from back of house to front of house for the first time, where you're kind of like, I don't know, I think I'm going to be a fish out of water. What was the biggest thing that surprised you to those two sides of the house?
Well, the first thing was Michel had to embrace that. You have the corporate president, from the hotel and the investment side, And Michel had a great relationship with the corporation. And so Michel and I had a good relationship. And, he saw what I had shown from a financial standpoint. But at the same time, he was a little skeptical about my skills on the front of the house. But he gave me an opportunity. And, I was going in. The good thing was that I had been working for Michel already for a couple of years. So that made it easy while I was transitioning and visiting the properties that I had a relationship with the chef, with the other GMs of the operation. So that made it easy to transition. The big thing was, connecting with the maitre d', learning the wine side of the business, the beverage side of the business. So that was the big hurdle for me. But the good thing was that when I was with Jean-Louis at the Watergate, he had a great wine cellar, and I learned a lot from him and his team of, wine and pairing food with wine, things like that.
And so was that sort of the most challenging element, was learning how to pair the wines with the food? Or was it just like a completely different operational experience because you're buying it differently, you're serving it differently than you would food?
Well, I was involved in the entire operation at Citronelle in Baltimore. So it was not something totally new. You started doing wine inventory, understanding, all the different wines, the vintages, where they're coming from, and then making sure the costs are right and all that. So you learn from that part. Unlike food, you have much more involved in the wine and beverage side. And, in our business, you make a better profit in food, in beverage than in food. So you really needed to understand that and make sure that the pricing was correct, the markups were correct, the pours were correct, pilferage, things like that you have to keep an eye on the front of the house as well.
So how did the opportunity at Northwood Hospitality first come about?
So when I left HEI Hotels and Resorts, I started my own consulting business. And at that point, I had an opportunity where HEI gave me a good start. They were my first client in Minneapolis, opened a restaurant for HEI in the Westin in Minneapolis called The Bank. And I was involved in that prior to leaving. So that made it easy. And then I started to reach out to different people that I knew. And my previous president from Capstar, who threw me into the front of the house, was the president of Northwood Hospitality. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, we would love to have your services. We're looking to, buy one hotel in Houston. I can't bring you on full time, but it would be great that if you could help us with the concept, look at the operation, look at the kitchen, look at the front of the house, and give us your insight, and then ongoing consulting services." So I did that with the Houston hotel for Northwood. And then they bought another hotel in Boston, the same deal, but that was a total renovation, changing it from the Radisson to a Riviera lifestyle hotel. It was called the Riviera. And we created an high energy bar, dining, all those sorts of things. And so those were the two hotels. And at the same time, my business was also taking me to China and Egypt and Africa for consulting as well. So I was juggling North America and also abroad. And then eventually Northwood decided to buy a portfolio of hotels. And they said, "Okay, we feel that we want to start our own platform, the hospitality platform. And so we're going to hire, food and beverage, sales, finance, all that. And we'd love for you to join." And I said, "The only reason I'll join is, when I was with Interstate Hotels and Resorts, I was overseeing 400 hotels. but it was not fun for me. It was not creative, and I wanted something smaller. And, I love the brands, but I wanted more boutique luxury style. And Northwood was, right up my wheelhouse there.
Okay. And so when you joined them full time, was it in the current role that you have now?
So I started off as a VP of food and beverage and procurement, and then just moved on to executive vice president over the years. At that point, we purchased the Palace Hotel in New York City, 900 rooms, $140 million renovation, putting in 7 food and beverage outlets. We picked up the London West Hollywood. We picked up Chica Lodge. So we started to, catapult to a real owned management company.
And so how does Northwood's approach to business and people make it special, set it apart from other groups?
Well, the thing with Northwood, it is a subsidiary. So Northwood Investors is the mothership, and Northwood Hospitality is a subsidiary of Northwood Investors. We primarily operate in boutique operational model and high touch collaborative management style. We also have some branded hotels like the Conrad in Nashville, the Luxury Collection in Ballantyne, and then we have some select service. But primarily they started with boutique, but yet independent hotels. The New York Palace was not boutique, but it was an independent, iconic hotel. So the important thing about Northwood is that it's a direct ownership and management of assets, allowing for giving our teams hands-on and flexible approach to operating, at the same time creating value for the investors. We are proven experience across multiple hospitality segments. As I said, resorts, select service, boutique, and branded hotels. And we look at everything. So even from the home office, we are very much involved in the operation and helping support the operation. We give them a lot of autonomy. At the same time, they have to, bounce things off of us, but we're not bureaucratic. We don't want to put obstacles in the way. So from a traditional hotel management company, we're different that way.
How many properties in the portfolio currently?
We're at 9 at the present time, plus 2 restaurants that are separate. All our hotels and resorts have restaurants, but primarily at one point we were like 15 hotels. So we buy and sell, but we keep our hotels for a while.
Okay. And so in your current role, Karim, as Executive VP of Food and Beverage, how do you approach integrating technology like AI and predictive purchasing into your procurement practices?
So a couple of things. We do use AI in predictive analytics of demand and forecasting for buying. I work with the GPO on purchasing on that side of the business, and we are looking at first we have contracted pricing, so that gives us a leg up. The other side of that is what with everything that's going on with inflation, with tariffs, things like that. We really need to have the finger on the pulse on a weekly basis. I will have a vendor that I have a contract with, and all of a sudden the contract is coming up, and they're prior to the contract, coming to end, they're talking about, raising prices by 5% because of tariffs. So, we have to look at what our other alternatives are. And in predictive purchasing, you have to be ahead of the curve, look at what are the other providers out there that can give you best pricing with great service and with delivery at the same time, making sure that they can support the hotels across the country. It's important that we are also looking at predictive pricing, not only from the manufacturer, but also from what's going on from the menu standpoint. So, as prices keep going up, labor keeps going up. We have to look at analytics, and so Northwood has also just recently launched a BI system where I can go in and look at what the cost of different product is and what it costs me to put it on the menu based on, each part of the country has different labor costs. Delivery costs are different. So I have to use my, business intelligence systems to look at some history, but at the same time, look at my contracts and make sure with my GPO, my global purchasing partnership, that I'm getting the best pricing. So we look at commodity pricing. If you look at coffee has gone through, up by 30%. But at the same time, you have a partner that is willing to stay true and kind of not pass on all the tariff costs through. And they're going to take a hit. We're going to take a little bit of hit. We have to make immediate changes in our pricing on the menus. When you're starting to pay $30 for a dishwasher in California, and I can only charge so much from, on the menu, I have to go back to my, my distribution, my GPO to see what things that we can change, not from a quality standpoint, but get better pricing on product that can help bring some of the food costs down and, help, with the labor that we have to pay these days.
How dynamic are those pricing fluctuations? Is it, I'm planning for a month out, or is it like you get an alert on your dashboard that's like, we got to change a price today?
You can get an alert on a daily basis. If you look at commodity pricing, look at beef prices, how they have escalated with all the diseases that were hit with cows. And so our pricing kept going up. And so give you a quick example. One of our hotel restaurants in Florida, we saw that our food costs kept inching up, and our profitability, going down. So I had to go down, work with the distributor who processed our steaks and our meats, chicken, all that, and start to talk about, okay, what can you do for me? We have been a great partner. Can you, number one, give me national pricing, and I will commit to certain amounts of volume. At the same time, I'll bring in the other hotel that's just across the road so we can negotiate, and it's better for you on transportation cost, production cost, things like that. And then what are the other cuts that we could implement that are, great quality, but don't need to be. So for example, let's take a filet. Filet is a very tender piece of beef, right? And you don't always need to serve prime filet. You can have an aged, or you could have choice plus, and at the same time give guests a good value. Same thing with the hamburger meat. What can we do there? So you're looking at produce going up and down when labor in this country is getting more expensive. So that is ongoing on a weekly basis. Those prices change.
Karim, I want to shift gears in our conversation. We've been talking a lot about the professional side, but I want to talk about sort of you as a person a bit more. And I know part of that revolves around the work that you do to help improve other people's lives. I'd be curious to hear more about the work that you've done in Baltimore with both young people and single abused mothers.
Yeah, that was, I kind of fell into that. When you get recognized as a chef, the community reaches out. And to me, the first time I was approached, I was a little bit skeptical of what was involved. And it was for a home of boys that had gotten into trouble and were, in a challenging situation where they didn't have a skill. They were teenage boys. And so they came to me and approached me and said, would you be willing to help these kids with, learning a skill? So I said, okay, let me come and see the space, what's involved, all those sorts of things. So I looked at the space. I looked at, the juvenile kids that were in that detention center. And, it was something that opened my eyes that there's a different world than just the marble pillars and the fine dining that I have grown up in and I lived in. But I came from that background. I was not a juvenile delinquent, but I came from, challenged where, my family had hard time putting a meal on the table. Right. And so I said, this is an opportunity for me to give back. So I started with a 10-week program where I would go every week and work with these kids. And the attitudes were totally negative. Who are you? What are you going to show us? And here I am coming in to these juvenile kids, young kids, and showing them how to use a knife. And a knife is a dangerous weapon. So initially I was very skeptical. And so they would watch and you have to find a couple of kids that want to learn. And then the other ones that want to stand on the side and just watch. And so as I started to work with the other kids and showed them knife skills, all of a sudden it piqued their interest of what was I doing and could I show them how to do that? So by the end of the 10 weeks, I had all the kids, just willing to learn, embraced what I was teaching them. And initially discipline was a problem, all those sorts of things. But the way I could speak to them was through my skill. And then we had a graduation. So for the graduation, we brought them to the rooftop of the Citronelle restaurant in Baltimore. Now, these kids had never been in a hotel. And they came in and they walked into the hotel. They were all dressed up, ties, suits, the whole 9 yards, truly professional. And we cooked lunch for them. And then a couple of the kids loved what was happening, that they applied for a job and we hired them. So it was very fulfilling for me to do that. The other part was, I had the opportunity in Baltimore where these abused women, I would go into their homes and abused women's homes and teach them how to cook healthy foods for their children. So that was another part that was very fulfilling for me at the same time. So I've done that a few times. And then I had an opportunity to give back in Africa as well with the Maasai in Kenya. So that was another great opportunity. The Maasai in Kenya, where working with them on sustainable cooking, they had North American clientele and how to cook North American food with local ingredients. And that was another eye-opener, a great learning experience. So, hospitality really opens up a lot of borders for you. And sky's the limit when you want to give back.
What does that feel like to give back like that?
It's truly fulfilling. It's something I want to continue to do. I would say it's worth a lot, and all the money in the world does not have the same impact that helping others grow and see them, evolve into professionals that can help them sustain their livelihood, their families, and have an amazing career. Giving back. Somebody gave me in life a chance, coming in as a refugee. And I want to do the same thing. I stood on others' shoulders to get to where I am. And it's time for me to give back at the same time.
I love that. And we talked a little bit about, those challenges that you had coming over as a refugee, having to learn the culture. You didn't have anything. You're starting over all again. What's another big challenge in your life, Karim, that you've had to overcome? How did you get through that? And what did you learn going through that process?
Well, one of the biggest things was, when I left the Watergate, it was not on good terms. And I won't go into a big story about that, but it was a life learning lesson for me. And I was very disappointed. I was down. I didn't work for about 2 months, and come to find out that somebody had an agenda that was, not good at the end of the day. But what was good was, Jean-Louis Paladin really was influential in the community, and he helped connect me with Michel Richard, which today has helped me grow to where I am today. So it's critical that you keep your relationships, and it was a tough time, not knowing where I was going to end up. But that opened a lot of doors. So having those relationships, keeping them close to your vest, treating people with respect, I think those are key elements of, some of the mistakes and career movements as a setback, but then persevering and opening doors.
So, Karim, as you think back to that uncomfortable parting of ways at Watergate, is there maybe a part of you that has a little bit of gratitude for that experience because of the doors that eventually opened up for you?
Absolutely. When you're in it and you're close to it, you don't realize what you're going through, that it is making you stronger. It's making you think differently. And how can you in life, once you've gone through it, then you realize that any adversity that comes, even though I went through hardship coming in from Uganda, but I was a kid, I was 12 years old. I didn't know any better. It was more difficult on my family than myself. As you become an adult and you get into the professional world or in life, you really look at your experiences not to dwell on, but to learn from. And that's what makes you stronger and move forward. So I feel that that's a great step. And look, life is not easy. Life is hard. But if you embrace it the correct way and don't go down a wrong path, and if you have people that are supporting you through that, my mother, my sister, my friends, they were all, supportive during that time. And even though you don't feel good about it, they're there for you. And you don't even need to reach out because they know what you're going through.
Mm. And you also mentioned the importance of maintaining those professional relationships, because that's something that, as you left Watergate, that really helped to get your feet back on the ground. Do you have any recommendations for listeners on how they can do that themselves, how to maintain those relationships?
Yeah, I think it's important. So, when I spoke earlier about Jean-Louis and the chef's brotherhood, I think it's important, for us all to continue to nurture those relationships. It's not about just picking up a phone and calling and saying, hey, how you're doing. It's really, networking and developing those 3 or 4 core business relationships that you can have, that you can share ideas with, that you can, be totally transparent and address what you are looking to do or what challenges you're going through. And at the same time, reciprocate, with them. And, food and beverage brings people together. And whether you are in the hospitality business or you're in the technology business, it's always good to break bread with somebody and you see a different side of them. You have a great open conversation where you're not in a fishbowl, but you're communicating and getting to know each other of who we all are, and supporting each other through that times. When Michel Richard was, part of our organization, even with Northwood, he was going through some challenging times. We would sit down and just chat. And, I knew the challenges he was going through and how I could help him through that. And then it's up to the individual what they want to do or not do. But it's critical that you invest in your friends and your professional friends and family.
So it's not like I've got to keep close tabs on 100 different people. It's sort of this core circle of folks that you trust, that you can open up to, that you guys can share stories and support each other.
Absolutely. And it's the core, and that's important. You don't need to, like you said, have 50 or 100. It's important that you understand what is it that clicks between you and that person, and are they on the same wavelength as you, and how can they support you, off and on.
Karim, I've just got one more question for you today, but before I ask it, I want to do 3 quick things. First of all, anybody that wants to get in touch with Karim directly, we've got his email address here, klakhani@northwoodhospitality.com. So that's KLAKHANI at northwoodhospitality.com. And don't worry, we'll include that in the show notes. Also, as a reminder, if you want to get your hotel and restaurant employees access to benefits that won't hurt them financially and carries that financial upside for the company, reach out to us at addbackbenefits.com. Finally, if you'll take just a moment and leave us a comment or review on your favorite podcast app, you'll hold a special place in my heart forever. Thank you. So last question for you now, Karim. You and I reconnect a year from today, and you're celebrating something really big. What's that big thing that you hope to be celebrating 1 year from today?
Wow. That's quite the question. I hope that I'm celebrating improving somebody's life, that they reached out, or I was put in a situation where I had the opportunity to share my time and knowledge, and that took them to another level in their career, a greater level, to help them in their future, be it in the business sense or personal sense. Whether we're celebrating their success in business or in life, I hope it's something similar to that, that I had a part, something to do with that. So that would be my goal.
I love that. Karim Lakhani from Northwood Hospitality. I want to be the first to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time, Anthony. It was great. And let's stay in touch.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.